welcome to another tutorial video. Today's one is using some elements from the new Tonic Stamp Club number 26, which is called Good Vibes, and it's really like gorgeous retro kind of feeling images. So you've got like cassette tapes, you've got Rubik's Cube, you've got almost like a disco ball, you've got roller skates, a skateboard, little Tetris pieces as well, all sorts of different elements in here. And then you've also got the coordinating dies plus extra dies in there as well. And if you want to see a full in-depth look at exactly what's in this brand new stamp club, then make sure to check out my up close video of the stamp club as well. Plus you'll also get to see 9 more different ideas that I have done with this as well. But for this video we're going to be focusing on this card here because I know this is like a relatively simple kind of technique, the embossed resist, but I thought it might be quite nice to do a tutorial video on an embossed resist just to show you kind of like my process of how I do an embossed resist, because you never know what different crafters struggle with, and it's quite nice to just run through my way of doing something because it might help somebody else, not like necessarily the entire thing. I know a lot of you will know how to use an anti-static pad and do your heat embossing and everything like that, but not everybody knows all of the tips and tricks. So hopefully this might be useful to somebody just to see, you know, like how to get the best embossing, how do you stamp a pattern all over the background. This is using the gorgeous like mirror ball or almost like a globe kind of looking thing with some of these little shine marks as well to make a whole background. But not everybody knows the best or easiest way how to get the images so they're not overlapping and so that you can kind of make an overall pattern the easiest kind of way as well. So I thought this would be quite a nice sort of tutorial video to do, and we're going to recreate this card. Although the overstamping in the background, I did these little shine marks. We might change that up a little bit as we get to that point. I'm not sure yet, I haven't decided. But for this card I've gone with pastel colours, and I know the Rubik's Cube isn't realistic because you can only see 3 different colours, although you probably could get one side of the cube to only show 3 different colours, but typically a Rubik's Cube has 6 different colours because it's got 6 sides of the cube. But I just wanted to use these 3 pastel tones because all of the cards that I've created in the well, for the up close video are all in a gorgeous pastel colour scheme, and I didn't have inks that matched the other 3 pastel tones that I was using, so I just went for these 3 tones. And the great thing about using oxides, which is what we're using for the background, is when you spray them with water they get even more like pastel toned as well, so they really worked well for this pastel themed card. But go to town with whatever colours you want to, use any inks you want to, as long as they're water reactive they're going to work for this kind of technique. So first of all we're going to bring in our panel of white card, and I want to use some anti-static on here. You can use whatever anti-static you have. I know Tonic don't sell one, but the 2 that I always reach for are the Woodwear anti-static pad, which is one of these little bags, or this kind of like EK Success one. And my one actually, I'm probably a bit too violent with it because the whole brush has just gone inside, but it's still a nice vessel for adding the powder to the card. So I tend to sort of pounce the powder all over, and then I just use a little like blusher brush, I suppose, that I got from Poundland years ago to make the powder sort of go all over the card. If you use the Woodwear bag, I still tend to do this because if you think about it, you've just added powder onto the surface, and if you're going to stamp with a sticky ink, if you then put some embossing powder on the sticky ink, but some of that anti-static powder also gets on the sticky ink, you're not going to get embossing powder there because the anti-static powder is going to have stuck there first. So I always like to, you know, dust the excess powder off. It's still going to get rid of that static for you and stop your fingerprints of like making oily marks on here that your embossing powder is going to stick to. So hopefully that kind of makes sense as to why you use the anti-static powder and why I always brush it off with a brush if you see me do that in any of my sped up videos. Then the next step is I always like to work with my piece of scrap paper underneath me, so I've just got a sheet of A4 printer paper, and then we want our piece of card in the middle. I've got our stamps already mounted onto some acrylic blocks, so we've got like the mirror ball kind of one here, and then I've just mounted these 2 stars next to each other on a tiny little block. But whatever images you want to use for the background, make sure you've got them ready. Hopefully the focus won't go in and out too much because we're working on a white piece of paper. Then, ink pad wise, you can use Perfect Medium, you can use Tonic's Clear Mark, or you can use VersaFine. I would usually go for the Clear Mark, but my one has actually dried up, and I don't think they do a re-inker for it, so I'm going to go with VersaMark today. And I also thought this would be a good tip to share with you as well. This is my VersaMark that I've had for years. It's not actually as bad as I thought it looked, but if you do have a really dirty pad, I would recommend using white embossing powder for this next step, because if you're stamping with a dirty ink pad, even though it's sticky, you're going to get actual like light impressions of where you're putting all of the images, and if you put clear embossing powder over the top of that, you're going to trap in that like dirty stamped image, whereas if you put white over the top of it, you should just get a white image and you won't be able to see. But when you're working on white card and you want a white emboss, you have got the option to use either clear or white embossing powder. But if you have a really dirty ink pad, I would say go for white embossing powder. But because mine's not too bad, and the previous two that I have done of these backgrounds haven't had like dirty sort of images as I've been stamping them, so I'm just going to go with this pad and use clear powder. But if you are worried that your pad is dirty, then definitely go with white powder. I thought I'd throw that tip in as well, because some people might wonder why you might see someone do an emboss resist and they use white powder, but other people use clear powder. I think that is usually your kind of reasoning behind it, or it might just be whatever you have as well. But that is what I would tend to do. So we're going to ink up our stamp and take the first sort of globe piece and just place that wherever we want it on our card. So I'm probably going to have it mostly onto the card, and I'm going to press here. Oh, and the great thing about an emboss resist, because we're using a sticky ink pad, you tend to get a good impression every time you stamp with it, so you don't need a stamping platform. You can just use your acrylic blocks for this, which is really nice. So it means you don't have to actually have it. Now for this next bit, I'm going to move my scrap paper towards the top of my desk, and then I'm going to get my clear embossing powder, and I'm going to tip over that first image. And you can see now where that first image is. This is how I like to work. I know some people will stamp their entire background and then put the embossing powder on, but I don't want my images to overlap, so I find that this is the easiest way to do it. And we're going to just keep this out, the rest of the powder, because it makes it so much easier rather than like putting that back in the pot and then stamping the next one and then tipping more out and then putting it back in the pot. It's much easier to do it this way. So the next image I'm going to put on is, I'm going to go for another globe actually, because any gaps between the globes we can fill in with the little shine marks. I do fill them in as we're going along, but you can go with the bigger elements first, I think, and then fill in a few and then sort of come down the whole panel of the card. Now we kind of want to twist our image as well, so this one was going off in that direction, so I'm going to twist this one slightly, and we don't want to like directly stamp exactly the same place on either side of this, so I'm going to move it up a little bit further so less of it is showing on our panel. And then because we already know where that one image is, we can also add another one here as well, because we already know where that image is, so we can put another one down here. Then, and don't worry that I smudged my finger on that one and dislodged the powder, because when we put this over the top, it will just correct that for you and add more powder back on top. So you've now got your 3 little disco balls on there. So now we've got those main 3. I can see that we want a full one right in the middle there. So we're going to ink that up again and get a full disco ball there and put more powder on. So we're getting a real decent mixture of the different orientations of the disco ball there as well. But you can see there are some areas that we could fill in with some of those stars. So I'm going to go in with the stars multiple times and bring my ink pad in. I'm kind of working off to the side here. I don't usually film this kind of a background, or I haven't in a long time. So we're just going to like take our star stamp and just stamp randomly where we feel like we could fill in some of the areas. And this is a really nice way of filling in extra gaps, having a couple of different sized images for this kind of a background. Okay, so we've got a few stars in there now. Then we can come back to more of the disco balls and put another one over here, and then we can bring another one down here as well. Sorry, I'm really out of frame. I have to keep moving this over further, I think. There we go, that's better. And then we'll put another one over here, and we can add the powder onto these. We might have to reload our pot with our powder, but for now we've still got enough, I think. So now you can see how far down the panel we've gotten. So I want some more stars just there, I think. So we're going to put another little cluster of stars just in there. And actually we could put another one right down in this corner as well. And we can put the powder on those. Then I think another disco ball here. And we might just be able to fill the last remaining areas in with just the stars. So if we go one more disco ball here, and we put the powder on that one so we can see where it is. Then we have got a kind of a large gap there, but I don't think that really matters. On the one that I've already got dried, we have got a kind of a larger gap there too, so it doesn't particularly matter. We can just add in a few more stars wherever we feel like we want to fill in the gaps. I think maybe another little star on the side there, and I think that will be pretty good. So we can now tip the last of the powder on, and we've got our full background with all of our disco balls and the stars on there as well. And if you don't like any areas when you heat emboss it and you've done your background, maybe you went too heavy with the stars in one area and you liked it more with just the disco balls, you can put your focal element over the part you don't like as well. Or you can chop it up into pieces and use it in a completely different way as well. So there's always ways of getting around it. So that is the background so far. I'll just put my powder away and then we'll come back. Okay, so we've got our completely covered background, and now the next step is heating it. There are two different types of like heat tools on the market. You can have this kind of one, which is a directional heat tool, which is what you should use for heat embossing, and there is also this type of tool on the market as well, which I think they both get up to the same temperature, but this one has less like air that comes out of it. So this is great for maybe if you're doing something with a lot of like thicker powders and it's more of a background kind of thing, or if you are just drying a background. For example, you've done what we're going to do later over the top of this, but just on a piece of card, where you've ink blended and sprayed it with water, or you've done the wrinkle-free distress technique where you dip your card into some ink, then you want to dry it and then you want to dip it in again. This kind of one is great for that, but for heat embossing you tend to want to use this one. It is possible to heat emboss with the other one. I think the reason why this one is better for heat embossing is because it has this like nozzle on it that actually directs the heat to a specific area. So when you are heat embossing, you're less likely to kind of overheat an area. You can be very specific with where you're applying the heat when you're heat setting it. So obviously no one wants to listen to the heat tool on a video for a couple of minutes. So I'm going to try and tilt this in the light on the camera so that you can see where the embossing powder is melting. You don't want to be too close to your cardstock when you're melting your embossing powder, because apparently you can singe it. I've never actually done that, but apparently you can singe it and turn it a little bit of a brown colour, and I presume if you can singe it there's probably a possibility that you could set it on fire, but I've never had that problem, so I don't think it's a very common kind of thing to happen. But I would say the more common thing to happen would be that you overheat your embossing powder because you feel like, oh, it's getting less shiny, so you heat it a bit more and then it kind of like sinks into the card, which is when you have overheated it, and then it won't work for any sort of technique like this because the shiny sort of aspect that sort of protects the card will have sunken into the card, so the emboss resist won't really work. But hopefully you'll be able to kind of see in this little bit with music how you kind of like move the tool as you see the little bits melting. So hopefully that'll work for you. really see the shine appearing as I was trying to hold it, but you could definitely see the powder melting because it changed what it looked like. And clear is obviously one of the hardest ones to kind of show on camera, but I think you can just about see the kind of clearness that you get when you've heat embossed it. So the next step for this background is you can, well, I mean, with Emboss Resist you can do anything that you like. I probably, going back to the conversation about using clear or white embossing powder for an Emboss Resist, you can definitely use colours as well, but it's just typically more done with clear or white because you get that more like stark contrast. But I would say if you are going to do like watercolour, I probably would go for the white embossing powder, because some cardstocks really do soak in the pigment of like a watercolour-y kind of medium, and you might end up not really getting the Emboss Resist kind of look because the cardstock underneath the clear embossing will get colour on it because of it like soaking through the fibres. So if you want really crisp sort of white designs and you're going to use something really sort of water-based like watercolours, you might want to go with the white powder. But for this one we are going to add water, but we're ink blending first and then we're going to spritz with some water. So it's a different kind of idea. We're not really like saturating the cardstock with something wet, we're just going to spray it a little bit afterwards, so we can get away with clear for this version of a background. So for this I'm going to use 3 different oxides. I've got Tumbled Glass, Cracked Pistachio and Squeezed Lemonade, because I wanted to go for these more like pastel tones, and oxides do tend to look like brighter when they're in their pads and when you first put them on, but because we are going to spray them with water you're going to get that oxidized kind of look, so they are going to go more pastel once we have sprayed them with water and it dries and everything. So you can use whatever ink blending or blending tools that you want to use. I'm really into these little brushes at the moment that I got on Amazon, so I'm going to use these, but any of the toothbrush style brushes, the you know, the large ink blending tools from, I'm just reaching for one, from Tonic, you can definitely use these. I want to be a little bit more precise because I want to go Squeeze Lemonade, Cracked Pistachio, Tumble Glass, Cracked Pistachio, Squeeze Lemonade, and it's slightly harder to do it with this kind of a brush because they're quite large and you're going to get an overlap of the different colours. So I tend to go for something smaller. I could definitely pull out some of my toothbrush style brushes like these little ones, or my other ones are over there and I can't reach them from sitting down and I'm too lazy to get up and get them. But you can use anything that you want to. If you still love using your mini ink blending tools with your foam applicators on the top, then use those. If you like using the like hog hair bristle sort of brushes, then you can use those as well. Whatever you like using for your ink blending then will work perfectly for this. So I'm going to start with the yellow and just load up my brush, and I want to go in a, I've already started on the wrong corner anyway, we'll do a diagonal in the opposite direction. Last time I started on this corner, but we'll go from this corner and we're going to go, we want like a nice triangle of yellow, and you actually want to go a bit further with yellow than you might want it to actually be on the card, because yellow is such a light colour. If we're then going to try and blend back and forth between 2 of them to get slightly more of a seamless blend, you might lose some of your yellow, so it's better to go a little bit further with the yellow. And also I know I just said about blending backwards and forwards to get a nice blend. If you don't get a nice blend, it doesn't matter, because we're going to spray this with water, so everything's going to move around anyway. So if you're not the best at ink blending, this kind of technique might be a good one for you, whether you are doing an Emboss Resist or whether you are just making an ink blended background. You can do this whether you're doing an Emboss Resist or not. You don't have to have anything on your card first. You can definitely just ink blend and then spritz with water as well. So this is a really good kind of technique for anyone who is like beginning with their ink blending and who hasn't got much confidence in their ink blending maybe. But look, oxides are actually really good for blending into each other. I mean, that looks pretty seamless as it is, and that was just taking the darker colour and going up next to the lighter colour. So if you've not tried oxides before as well, you might have better luck with those for your ink blending too. Then we're going to move on to the Tumbled Glass and go along with a diagonal with this as well. And we can blend into the Cracked Pistachio. There and get a nice coverage of the tumbled glass. You can kind of see the design popping. You can't see it as much with the yellow because the yellow is such a light colour, but you can kind of see the design popping, and it will pop more. Although from the original card you can see it's quite a subtle emboss resist because it's such fine lines, and we're working with pastel colours. But in the one that has dried, that I will show you, because we'll finish working on that card, you can see the emboss resist. It does pop out nicely once we've done the spraying with the water and everything. So we're going back with cracked pistachio, and then we'll go back with our squeezed lemonade as well. You can move your cardstock as you're working. You can take something like a scrap piece of paper and hold on to it so you don't get fingerprints in there as well if you want to. If you have the media grip mat from Tonic that they brought out a little while ago that's in conjunction with Tim Holtz, you could cut that into a smaller piece and put it underneath your cardstock so it doesn't move around whilst you're ink blending. You could use your CRaFTi's magnetic platform and have magnets on it, and then move the magnets when you want to ink blend the bit that's underneath the magnet. You can kind of do whatever you normally do with your ink blending, but you might get a few tips from the video of how I do my ink blending, but whatever you normally do will work for adding your colour. So that is our ink blended piece. We've got that beautiful diagonal happening, and I have left quite a lot of yellow because we are going to also spray with water, and as we all know, whenever you spray a background, the card domes up and it runs to different areas. So if you have, sorry, I've just moved a ink blending tool. So if you have accommodated for that and put a lot more yellow down, you're not going to be too disheartened when a little bit of green or blue runs into the yellow areas as well. So that is our main background so far. Then we're going to spray this with water. You can just do this directly onto your mat, but because we want to continue working, and I've already got a dried one so we don't have to sit here and wait for it to dry, someone commented years ago that they keep their old kit boxes and they turn them into a little spray box, and I've had this in the back of my mind for ages, but obviously I still never get around to actually doing it. But this time I have actually taken one of my old kit boxes, written spray box on it so I know that that's what it is and it's not a kit that's lurking down next to me, and we can open this up and have a little bit of kitchen roll inside, and we can use this as like a spray box so that we're not getting water everywhere. Or if you were this actually, I should say this too, you can do this with a mica mist if you want to. I would recommend the Aspen Gold because that has just got like a gold shimmer in it. It would look fantastic for this too. You'd get the movement of the water, but you'd also get the mica on there as well. Or you could also, if you wanted to, decant some of your aqua shimmer glitter gloss into a spray bottle, dilute it with some water and spray that over the top as well. That would look fantastic. Or while it's still wet, you could just squeeze some of your aqua shimmer glitter gloss or your Midas Touch or something over the top of it to get a little bit of shimmer in there as well. So there's multiple ways of doing this sort of step too. But yeah, the idea of having it in a box works really nicely because you can then move this box over to one side and carry on working for the rest of the elements for the card as well. So we're just going to take water in a spray bottle, and we want to just do maybe like 3 or 4 mists of water over the top. We don't want to drench it, and we don't want to do too little, because if we do too little you're probably just going to get a speckled effect unless that's what you're going for. But I kind of want a blended sort of look, and so some of the colours will run into each other. So I'm just going to go for like 4 spritzes over the top, or 3 maybe. I think maybe 3 is enough, or yeah, let's do 1 more because I did say 4. Okay, we'll go with 4. I will come back to this because, as I said, I know you can spray the back of the cardstock to make it stay flatter. I know someone commented that years ago as well, and I've always remembered that. But sometimes, especially if you're not turning your heating on to save money, it takes so long for the card to dry if you've wet it on both sides. So what I have actually been doing with these backgrounds, because I've done a couple of them now, I've been waiting until the card curves up a little bit, and we might as well actually just wait for it, to be honest, because I think it's going to do it quite quickly. So you wait until the card has bowed up. You can see it's kind of getting a little bit more curve to it, and then you can actually use this kitchen roll that's in the bottom to like dab off those excess pieces. You can see I was doing it with a pink piece here, and that's the edge piece. I just sort of dabbed it off, and in these places as well. And it just sort of helps get that weird line at the side. I mean, I don't know about you if you've ever done it, but if I had done this on my glass cutting mat and you'd got these puddles at the side, what usually happens for me is these puddles, the meniscus of the surface tension that's holding them onto the edge of the card will break. They'll smudge onto the glass mat, and then as the piece is drying, they'll get sucked back into it, and then you'll get these horrible lines at the side of your card. And that's not too bad if you are going to cut your piece of cardstock down, but I like to often work on the actual size piece, like this is the actual size piece, and then you don't want to cut anything off of it. So this kind of way of doing it actually helped to still get a beautiful effect right up to the edges. This was actually how it was. I didn't cut this down at all, but I don't have those nasty puddles that appear on the edges, or the backwash as it like drinks it back in as the card's drying. So once you've got to this sort of stage where the puddles have formed on both sides, all I did was just tip it and dab that excess off, and that really seemed to help with not getting those horrible lines on there. So hopefully that might be a tip that helps you as well. You can just dab it however many times you feel like it needs it. As you're like working on something else, you keep looking back at it, see if they've accumulated again, and dab them off if you need to too. But that is the main kind of background, and I'll leave this one off to the side to dry. So now we've got our dried version. You can see how beautifully that emboss resist pops through all of the colour, and how nicely it kind of looks. It gives it like a watercolour feel, but it was literally no effort at all, because all you did was ink blend it and spray it with a little bit of water. So it's a really effortless watercolour kind of looking background. So that is our dried background. And on the original one, I came back in with the little solid, like 4-pointed star. I was thinking about changing it, but I think I will just go with this one again, just to show you exactly what this card will turn out like. So we're going to bring back in the same 3 colours of Oxides, and we're going to stamp with those same colours in kind of like over the top of the same area, because we're now going in with like full strength colour. It'll show up really nicely, less so on the yellow just because yellow is a really light colour, but you can with Oxides, because they're more like pigment based inks, you can stamp over different areas. For example, we could take the yellow and stamp over the cracked pistachio and it is still visible, but you can kind of just stamp wherever you want to really. You can go over the top of a heat embossed area, just anywhere, just to kind of add a little bit of extra interest to the background. I quite like to sort of mainly keep them colour on colour, but it's also nice to kind of mix them up as well. And you might notice this is actually the perfect size to infill the outline. So if you wanted to, it's nice to have a piece of scrap next to you just to stamp off the excess ink. But if you wanted to, you come back in with one of the other colours and like stamp directly over one of your heat embossed images and actually add colour inside the heat embossed image as well. So it's kind of up to you. You don't have to do this step. I just thought this is a different way. Like normally I might squish a little bit of each of these onto my glass mat and splatter them on the background, but I know not everybody likes splatter, but this kind of gives that look of like some extra interest like splatter would give you to the background, but it's not splattering, because I do know that some people don't like the splattery look, or they struggle with splattering and get it all over their face. I mean, if you could see, I don't know if actually this camera is all right. My old camera, it has like splatters all around the edge of the lens where I've like accidentally splattered it up there. So everybody struggles with splatters, I think, at least at one point in their life. But if you don't like the splattered look, this is like another sort of like just kind of like scattered elements around a background, and it just gives a little bit of extra interest. It doesn't have to be a little solid stamp like this. It could be maybe you had one of the older stamp clubs with the gorgeous like patterned backgrounds. That kind of thing would look lovely just stamped in the background as well for a little bit of extra texture. And because I've been talking, I've probably gone a little bit heavy-handed with that compared to the original, but it just gives it a really nice look, I think. I do like the look of that. So that's another way of kind of adding to your background. But if you liked it before, then don't do the stamping. So whatever kind of way you want to do it will work really nicely. So that is our actual background completely finished. Now we need our elements. So I haven't actually done any of the die cutting yet. I thought I would just leave that to do with you. Hopefully it's not making the video too long. But what I want to do is I want to cut one from grey, one from a pastel yellow, a pastel green and a pastel blue that go with my ink blended colours, because I want all of this to coordinate. If you went with the real colours of a Rubik's Cube, they wouldn't really go with the background, having like bright orange and green and red and yellow and blue and everything. So yeah, I thought this would be a nicer, sort of subtler kind of option to go with this. And then once we've done this element, I'll show you how to stamp the sentiment and trim it into a neat little banner as well. So let's get my tangerine. I'll zoom out a little bit. So I'm using my half cut plates, which my dad cut in half for me. So if you want half cut plates, you can just cut your full size plates in half and use them in your machine like this as well. So first of all, for this one, oh, I need to use my pokey tool to pick this up because it's two dies stuck together. For this one, I have stuck both the dies together if you didn't already realise that. But the first one, we want to keep the outside. We want the actual grey around the outside. I mean, if you were going to go with the real colours of Rubik's Cube, you'd want to do this in black, because I'm pretty sure the plastic around a Rubik's Cube is black. But for this one, we're going for the grey. And then you can definitely keep these square pieces. If you watch my up close video, there's an idea using all of these little square pieces to create an actual background with. But for this card, we want just the outline from the grey, and we want those square pieces from the colours. So from this one, we can keep the outline. I've actually got loads from the other ones that I was cutting, and you could definitely turn this into a different card. You can butt them all up next to each other, you can overlap them over the top of each other, you could snip them into different shapes if you want to. If you cut off those four corners, it would turn it into like a cross kind of shape, and you could do something cool with that as well. So keep those pieces, but for this card we actually just want the little squares, and we actually only need 4 of these. I think I did 4 yellows on it. So, well, we actually get 9 in the square, so we'll have some of those left over as well. Then we want some of the pastel green ones. Hopefully this bit isn't too boring for you. And then, again, we can keep that outside piece. We might want to use that on a different card. And we can poke all of the squares out of there. And then we want the light blue as well. Okay, so we've got all of the little colours that we need for this now. Zoom you back in. And then I'll show you my trick for sticking these back together, but also raising it up on 3D foam simultaneously. So what I like to do is, we've got all our little pieces there. I like to take the backing piece of some double-sided adhesive sheet. This is actually from the new wide roll of Craft Perfect tissue tape. Two of the cards that will be in my up close video, I used this on. It's really good actually. I'm really impressed with this. So what you do is you want this here so that we can stick foam tape across the back of this, and it's not going to stick to our glass mat. This is like a lovely slick surface that it will just peel off of. But if you have your Easy Clean mat, you can definitely use that as well. Then we want to so you know a die cut has the professional side and then the sort of back of the die cut. We want to face it professional side down, and we're going to put our foam tape on the back of it. You can use whatever profile of foam tape you like. I really like a 1mm one at the moment. And we're just going to cut a piece of that off and lay it over the back. And then get another piece as well, and we could trim this down a little bit first, might make it a little bit easier, and then stick that over the back of there. And then we just want to undercut that final side so we get rid of that excess of the foam tape that's hanging out. Okay, so now we just have all of our 9 apertures with the sticky side of some foam tape on there. this is actually also a great way of saving all of these random pieces. I always stick them to the edge of my roll, and then it really drives me bananas. So actually I could utilise that piece and put all of those edge pieces on there. So now we've got our little Rubik's Cube. I'm going to follow the same colourway I did on this one. So I've gone a yellow one in the top corner, and then I've actually done like a tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses kind of diagonal across. You could use this for a noughts and crosses kind of game actually as well on a card. That would work really nicely. Then I've done 2 of the light greens. You could definitely change up the colours dependent on where your colours appear on the background and which one you feel like got lost a little bit more and you want to add more of as well. So we've got 2 greens there. I've done another yellow one over here, and then the rest is 3 little blue ones. And they're really easy to just pop all of these back in. And all of the 9 squares are the same, so it doesn't matter where you're placing them in. You do get a slightly different, like, little bit of embossing on the side of some of them, where they, depending on where they came out of the original one, but I don't think that really matters. I don't think anybody's really going to look that closely at it. But that is our little Rubik's Cube that we will be taking the backing off of that and sticking it onto our main panel in a second. But first we need to do our sentiment as well, because it's kind of nice to have your sentiment ready, so you can kind of hold the sentiment there, place your main portion and stuff, and decide how you want it to look. And we've also got our card blank here as well that we will be mounting that onto. So for the sentiment, when I was doing all of my cards, because I was doing so many of them, I did actually just do them in my stamping platform, because I pretty much wanted all of the sentiments from the set. But if you don't have a stamping platform, you're going to want to use some kind of nice long block, because this sentiment that we want to use is quite a long sentiment. So I really like this one. It says, you're not old, just retro. I really like that sentiment. And there are 2 different ones here that go really nicely, like the complete width of a small card. So there's the you're not old, just retro, or the I really love you as well. So if you are going to do this kind of design, but maybe instead of doing a die cut feature here, you could have the roller skate or the skateboard. You could use that other sentiment as your main sentiment as well. So then you just want to place your sentiment onto your acrylic block. If you have one with grids on, it makes it so much easier for lining this up. But if you don't have one with grids on, you can just put it on your glass mat and look through it and use one of the lines from your glass mat to get it lined up as well. And then, because Tonic stamps are like super high quality photopolymer, they are fantastic for stamping. I never even need to like prime any of my stamps. I just stamp with them as they are from the packet. So I always find the VersaFine Clairs are fantastic for stamping your sentiments, because you can get the perfect impression just with, just with an acrylic block. You don't have to use a stamping platform. So, but now I've said that, I probably won't get a perfect impression, but we'll just ink that up nicely. And then stamp this down, and we want a good amount of pressure across the whole stamp, especially on that solid bit, to make sure we get a good impression. I did just rock that, so hopefully that didn't mess it up. I think that's pretty good. So we've got our perfect little sentiment there. Then to cut this into a lovely little strip to go across our card, I usually, whenever you see me doing a sentiment, just bring out my long bladed pair of scissors. However, this sentiment is really long, and I mean, it's probably just about the length of the blade, but I am really bad at getting like a long sentiment straight. So if I'm doing one like this, I will bring out my trimmer. So the way I do this in a trimmer, I don't butt it up against the edge because I don't know if I've stamped it straight on my card. I'm actually looking at this plastic guide when I'm deciding where to cut on this. So I'm actually looking at where the sentiment falls on this plastic guide here. And I'm actually sort of looking, okay, this is about 2 millimeters away from the edge of the plastic guide. The font is maybe... No, the font is the same height all the way along, so I want to make sure it's about 2 millimeters above the wording here and about 2 millimeters above the wording over there. And then I can chop that first side. You could, if you wanted to, then chop this straight so that you could butt it against the top, but I usually just eyeball it. And I like to actually, you can either, for this next bit, you can either go and do like the 1mm, 2mm away from that line, or you can actually look through the plastic and use the edge of the metal as a guide as well to get a perfect little strip. I think I will go with the writing trick on this one though. So I think I'm just going to look at where the writing is falling against the plastic guide, and think about there. And then we have our perfect little sentiment strip. I don't know if it's exactly the same as this one. Oh, it's pretty spot on actually. I probably did about the same measurements for the other one. So now we've got our sentiment ready for our card. The way I stuck this sentiment on, because I knew I wanted this to overhang the panel, because it's a really long sentiment, overhang the panel and actually fall onto the edge of the card blank. I didn't want to have to cut through foam tape on the edges of this because it's really difficult to cut through and get a nice finish on the front of it. So what I actually did was I eyeballed where I wanted that to be. Then I went and took some of my 3D foam, and then I cut a piece that was about the right kind of width to go behind this sentiment, and then I just put it onto the card and made a straight strip across the card, and that needs to be a tiny bit narrower. And then, oh, I eyeballed that really well. And then you can just peel off the backing of that and stick your sentiment straight on. And if you are worried about getting it straight, you can use the grids on your glass mat and line the bottom corners up with, you know, any sort of line down here, and then actually use the lines further up to, if I wasn't keep wiggling it around, to actually line up where your sentiment is going to be so that it's going to be straight. But I usually just eyeball it, to be honest. I don't think anybody's really going to look at it. Maybe another crafter might go, oh, actually that's a little bit off, but I don't think anybody receiving one of your cards would actually tell you that something wasn't straight on one of them. So I'm going to place it there. And then I quite liked adding the Rubik's Cube at a jaunty angle, but you could put it straight on as well if you want to. Just depends how you feel it looks to your eye and which one you prefer, but I do quite like it at the wonky angle. So I'm going to take the backing tape off of those. I'm going to put it in the same orientation as the original as well, and we can just place that on like so. Then we want to add this to our card blank. I wouldn't usually show you this because it's so you know, easy to do, but we still need to trim off those sentiment bits, so I thought I would actually do this to show you. I'm coming to the end of my roll again. I'm sure when I did one of these previously or recently, I was coming to the end of my roll. You can see how quickly I get through that tape because I really enjoy using it. I've made so many cards recently as well that, you know, you really do get through the tape. I think I've made like 30 cards in the last few days because of 10 for this one and some other bits and pieces that I'm working on. So, oh, I need a piece across the middle as well, actually. Okay, so we'll remove the backing off of all of this. And these two pieces, and fold that around any bits that overhang. Then you want to take your card blank and line up your panel on there with however much of a white border you've allowed for when you've cut your panel down. And then to get these to be flush with the edge of the card blank, you want to turn this over, and I do prefer using my long bladed pair of scissors. Sometimes it's not possible because other bits of the card sort of get in the way, but I like to take my scissors. If you don't want the serrated edge showing, make sure your Tonic logo is facing away from what you're cutting. So if your thumb is here in your scissors, your Tonic logo needs to be on the opposite side to where your thumb is, and you can just trim that off to get it flush with the edge of the card. And when you turn it back over, you'll have the perfect finishing of your sentiment banner, and you won't have the serrated edge on there. It doesn't matter so much with the larger scissors, mostly more with the little snips. They have that serratedness on They do only have it on one blade, but it tends to always show. So again, with these ones, it would be Tonic logo on the outside and the thumb on this side, so opposite sides again. I think I did say that in my video where I showed all of the Tonic scissors years ago. But anyway, that is the finished card for this tutorial. So I really hope you enjoyed. Hopefully it's not too much of a basic technique to show you, but I thought you never know how far people's knowledge kind of stretches and whether any of the little hints and tips of how I make a card would help somebody else. So hopefully do let me know actually if any of the little tips and tricks have helped you. So I really hope you've enjoyed the video. If you like the look of this stamp club, there will be affiliate links in the description box below the video and on my blog post as well, and there will be my up close video too. So just if you're not already on my channel, if you're watching this somewhere else, head over to my Crafty Potential channel and you'll be able to find my up close video giving you a full in-depth look at the stamps and the dies from the stamp club, showing you which ones have coordinating dies to go with them and showing you 10 different samples of ways to kind of use them as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!